Hello and welcome to Real Heart Talk. You are enough. Today we are going far across the pond over to the UK, and we have Miss Debi Richens, and I hope I said that right. She is the
Close.
Richens, Debi Richens. She is the relationship phoenix, and she helps rebuild relationships and talks about their emotional loss and trauma and how to overcome that. She creates a safe space for individuals so that they feel comfortable releasing their emotional baggage and redefining their self-worth. We all want to know we're worthy, right? We are deserving and worthy, and helps transform their future. Debi is the founder of the Phoenix Awakening Training, Coaching, and Mentoring, and she is a sought-after speaker, a passionate advocate for self-healing and empowerment. So we welcome Debi today from across the pond. Thank you so much for joining us on Real Heart Talk.
Thank you for asking me. I'm really delighted to be with you, Pamela.
Yes, I am too. And we've had some good conversations. We should have recorded those too. But today
Yes,
I want
funny
you.
how we sometimes do that.
I know. It's like we should have the record on all the time. But I want you to share today what's on your heart and help our audience realize they're not alone in whatever they're going through, and how that they can take one more step, one more day, how that they can move forward from wherever they are.
You know, we have many experiences in our lives, and for a great many of us, especially around my age group, and I'm 60, you know, we were taught to put ourselves last. We were taught that the home was important, the children were important, our husband was important. Whatever work we had to do was important. So we always came last, and we didn't learn how to nurture and care for ourselves fully.
Mm.
Those of us that did do that were looked on as selfish and greedy and, egotistical and all of these things that actually we're not, because nobody taught us that self-preservation, self-care, self-love are vital parts of how we move forward. So for me, the impact was huge. It actually impacted my health, and I ended up having 2 emergency surgeries over several years because of it. And it wasn't until I had the second one, although the first one was the big eye opener. That was when the surgeon said, well, you know, the domestic abuse you've been experiencing for so long is actually a big indication of as to why I've been doing this surgery. But it was the second one that really impounded it, because I suddenly realized that I'd been trusting the medical profession too much as well. And so there was a lot of grief around my health and how I'd been let down rather than been educated. Because again, we were taught to blindly look at the health service that we have, the doctors and the nurses, as gods. And they're
Mm.
not. They're human beings just like us. But we're taught that because they have a degree, they're all powerful and almighty. And they're not. They make mistakes, they make misdiagnosis. And that's what I experienced that led to the second emergency surgery. And I lived with the consequence of that for 18 years,
Mm.
19 years
Mm.
before it manifested itself in such a way that I could no longer do anything about it because it was overtaking me. So the journey I've had has been about learning who I am, learning where that real me stopped being and put herself away in a box, learning how so many of the things I never spoke of, actually, I ought to be speaking of. I ought to be airing them and letting those words out. You know, people will often say, well, you've got a sore throat, take a throat lozenge. But actually, when you get a sore throat, it's often because they're the words that you need to say that you're not saying. And your
Mm.
body is trying to tell you there is something wrong. You're not speaking. Speak, speak, speak. And it's the same with lungs. You know, when we get lung infections and chest infections and all these things, we're holding on to the words that we really need to be expressing. So
Yeah, I want to
concentrate.
stop you right there for 1 second because I want to go back to what you said about the real me you put in a box. And I feel like that women do that to survive. It's a survival mechanism. You know, if I can't be the real me, I'm going to box that off over here. And then this is what I've got to do to survive.
Yeah.
And you know, we are survivors and we are thrivers. I mean, as you are a perfect example, I'm a perfect example. You know, it's not what we've been through, it doesn't define us, it refines us, you know, for a better future. So I really love what you expressed there because a lot of our listeners may be in that survival mode. And that, as Brenda Burchard talks about, the three phases, that's a caged, you know, place. You
Yeah.
want, you need to break out of that cage and break those barriers, you know, to come out. And I know
Yes.
that you help your audience as well do that. So do you have some ideas or strategies that you share with your audience of how to break free from that cage and get out of that box so that you're not just in a survival mode?
Yeah. So one of the most important things is actually that old-fashioned pencil or a pen, because there is scientific evidence to prove that writing and watching those words flow is
Mhm.
very powerful for helping you to release. But actually, it's also about the acknowledgement. If you constantly swallow everything down and put it in that box, you're not acknowledging what you're experiencing. You're not expressing what you're experiencing. And it's vital. You know, it might be that you have a journal and you really don't know where to start. Because I know when I first had just a basic little notebook and a pencil, I sat there and looked at it and thought, but what if I write in there and somebody else sees it?
Mhm.
But you know what? That's not the worst thing. Because the worst thing is if you don't express those things in the first place, if you don't let them out. And there's a very well-known journaling prompt called the Artist's Way. And the Artist's Way advises, and it goes back to that scientific investigation. It advises not taking the pen or the pencil off the paper. You just keep writing
Mhm.
because it's about not losing the connection with yourself, with your thought process. And that's really vital. So, journaling, writing down your thoughts, even if you just want to write them as a bullet list because you don't have the energy or you don't feel you have the words to express in sentences, just write down the things that are troubling you or the things that have troubled you in the past that you've buried.
I love that. Is the
It's
artist
that
way a book? Is that a
The
book?
Artist's Way is actually a program. There is a book, and I think there's a journal as well, but it's very, very easy to do the process of the Artist's Way. The premise of it is to have an A4 book, just a plain book. Doesn't have to be anything exciting, just a normal, you know, student notebook type of thing. Have your pen or pencil, and just literally the moment you open your eyes, sit and write, brain dump 3 A4 pages.
Mhm.
And then you can go back and reflect on it at a later date. You know, you can set yourself a program of, looking at it in 2 weeks or looking at it in a month's time, because your mindset will be different from when you first let all that stuff out. So you'll be able to look at it in a more reflective way.
Mhm.
Because the journaling is just that, it's about being able to reflect on what you've written, assess what is the most urgent, and then deal with things in that order. So you can break it down into smaller lumps. Don't try to overwhelm yourself by dealing with everything all at once. This was, and I'll give you an example of that. this is what I experienced when I went through the beginning of my divorce, because nobody told me I was grieving. They just told me, oh, well, it's divorce, it's this, it's that. Go away and deal with it. Go away and stop crying. I couldn't stop crying. I literally was a permanent tap. But what I didn't know was that my body was rebelling from the inside with the first of the emergency surgeries. So I had a singular gallstone. And it wasn't until after I had the surgery, the surgeon actually told me, these are quite rare. They are caused by extreme stress and distress, of which I know you've been dealing with a lot. Your body couldn't expel the calcium buildup fast enough, so it made a ball. Now, that ball was just shy of the size of a tennis ball.
Oh my
So as
goodness.
it was forming, it was trying its darndest to do me in from the inside out.
Mm.
He'd only seen two in 24 years. So that's how rare they are, you know.
Wow.
And I'll tell you a funny story about him. I was working in dentistry at the time. That was the industry I'd been in for a very long time. And I went back to work, and he was a patient at the dental practice. And he came in
My goodness.
and he announced to the waiting room with a big grin on his face, "So lovely to see you with your clothes on." And I came round the side and I just popped my head round into the waiting room and said, "He's the man who made holes in me." So they all realised he was the surgeon, but yeah, cheeky devil. Typical UK consultant humour.
Yeah.
But yes, but it was that
That's a lot of
conversation with
stress.
him.
Yeah.
Sorry?
I said that's a lot of stress, a tennis ball
Oh,
size
oh
golf.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was it was very painful.
Yes.
I can say quite happily that that was far worse than childbirth. Far worse. Once you've done childbirth, it's out,
Yeah.
and your body can go, ha. But when you've got this thing inside you and it's got nowhere to go, that's a
Yeah.
slightly different matter.
Yeah.
But, so your body rebels if you hang on to your language. And I had so much going on. I had no idea where to start with expressing it.
Mhm.
So I was expressing it all the time, hence the overload of emotion and the constant tears that I just could not switch off
Mhm.
because I didn't know where to start. And I was overwhelming myself, let
Mhm.
alone anybody that was trying to listen and understand. Although what I found was there was nobody who had any idea of how to understand because they kept trying to put a label on it
Yeah.
rather than looking at it and going, actually, there are different types of grief going on here.
Mhm.
Because I was grieving the loss of who I was as a mother, as a wife, as a friend, because, divorce people disappear and start to become a bit strange when you don't expect them.
Mhm.
Disconnection from my family. Obviously, the disconnection from my daughter, which was enormous. And the people that got involved in the breakup of my marriage, that again was another lot of grief because A, I didn't understand why. It wasn't their business. But
Mhm.
B, the things they were saying were when these had been friends and members of the family, I was so shocked that I didn't know how to respond to those things. So I reacted in deep grief. And anger is part of deep grief. And it's something that people don't realize that a lot of anger is grief that is not expressed, as is anxiety, as is depression. You
Mhm.
don't need pills for those things.
Yeah.
You need to learn coping mechanisms.
So what
So,
was your pivot? What was your turning point from all this?
so my turning point actually was very interesting. I had given up dentistry. Something else I'd experienced there was extreme bullying from you know, mainly men who were wanting the money but not wanting to do the provision of the service.
Mhm.
And that's quite common because we have a different structure of health here. Well, quite common, relatively common for the type of service I was in.
Mhm.
And I then had started a bra making business. I can sew. And I was very brave because it was in the time before they did plus size bras, and I was extremely narrow in the back and very plus size and really struggling to find bras to fit. So I took the plunge. Terrible, that wasn't meant to be a joke. And I took myself up country to Leicestershire and I went and learned how to do bra making. It's an amazing thing to do, and it's a skill that I would never have said I would have, but I did it. And then
Wow.
I came back here and I set up a bra business and I made bespoke bras. And I started business networking because I had to sell my business
Mhm.
to get customers. And I was part of this lovely group of ladies. And a lady came to join the group who was talking about a book actually that came from the US called the Grief Recovery Method. And the grief recovery method had been birthed in Boulder, Ohio, and Boulder, Ohio, no, Boulder, Colorado, sorry, brains. And it had come from the grief of a man who was very analytical and had not found any peace from the grief he was experiencing. But because he was a scientist, he got his head together and he worked out a way from all the different things he'd tried how to help people with grief. And he used it first for himself, and then he started teaching other people. And he suddenly realized that he had something bigger. So it's worldwide. And that was where I suddenly sat reading the back of the book thinking, wow, I get it. It makes sense. You know, for the first time, I was reading about ambiguous grief, or as you would call it in the US, ambiguous loss. I was reading about the general grief. I was reading about the long term stuff that we never deal with, and it all made sense. It was like somebody had literally opened a box and the sun had popped out. It was an amazing sort of turnabout. So I said to her, okay, how do I do this? And she said, well, there are two ways. You come and do it with me, and you go away and you use it just for yourself. But she also knew that I was living with alienation and estrangement from my only child
Mhm.
and the domestic abuse. She said, I know that you will want to use this for other people. So why don't you go and train? Because you'll do the process that you take others through in 8 weeks in 2.5 days.
Mhm.
And I sat there and went, gulp. And I thought, actually, no, in for a penny, in for a pound, I'll do it. Because it made so much sense to me to go and learn the process right down to the nitty gritty, knowing that I'd have to do it first. And that was big turnaround in 2.5 days. My world completely changed because I was able to express how I felt about situations that had happened in my marriage that I had no control over. I was able to learn how to forgive properly, learn
Mhm.
how to apologize properly, but not just to other people, to myself.
Self. Yeah.
And being able to forgive yourself and apologize to yourself and hold that space is
Mhm.
the most compassionate thing you can do for yourself to support your self esteem, your self worth. Everything you are depends on that. but we've never been told that. Nobody ever says it. You don't see it written in the social media. It wasn't something we were taught at school in our, in our self. There was no self-care taught at school. If you were lucky, self-care was PE, physical exercise. It wasn't, maybe getting in the pool. It wasn't actually looking after yourself emotionally. It was about how you brushed your teeth and how you brushed your hair and how you washed your body, but
Mm,
not how you cared for your mind.
yeah.
And actually, I think that's the most important thing that we should be learning at school,
Yes.
how to care for our minds. And I've noticed there's a massive uptake, and I know it was starting about the time that my daughter was choosing the subjects for her exams. Psychology in school being taught to school children.
Mhm.
But I see a lot of damage coming from that.
Mm.
How the children then talk to their parents, how the children express dissatisfaction at their relationships with their parents and how their parents did them wrong. But the problem with teaching 14, 15, 16-year-old psychology
Mhm.
is that their emotional mind and their analytical mind is not fully formed because the prefrontal cortex, which is here, is the bit that creates all our logical thinking and allows the emotions to be processed properly. So that's all well and good. But if it's not fully formed until they're now saying 30, they used to say 25, why are we teaching a pseudoscience in a way? Because although psychology is quite a big thing, it can be so misinterpreted. And when they're young and they don't understand, they're misinterpreting.
Right.
So suddenly us as the mothers or the fathers don't understand what our children are saying,
Mhm.
can't make sense of the judgments and criticisms that are coming out,
Mhm.
and consequently families start to fall apart. When you've got a 14-year-old telling you, I know my own mind and I know what I want to do, and you're sitting there thinking, but you haven't got a clue. And how can I make you understand
Yeah.
when you can't make them understand?
Uh-huh.
And I didn't know at the time that other people were feeding my daughter a
Mhm.
pile of nonsense. I
Mhm.
didn't find that out until 10 years after it all started. And
Well,
for
and after
me,
a period of time, it's just like they're brainwashing, as they
exactly that.
continuously, yeah, and then that is what they believe, even though they're believing a lie. So you talked about your daughter and how is that alienation still there, or have you reconciled? How is that going?
No, sadly not. The damage was done so profoundly that I was I made lots of mistakes in my trying to build the relationship and strengthen the relationship because I didn't understand what was going on. I
Mhm.
didn't understand how she was being fueled by other people,
Right.
how the opinions and judgments she was making were being supported by other people's judgments and opinions.
Mhm.
So anytime I tried to make any kind of connection, reconnection, it literally felt like walking on hot coals,
Mhm.
you know, and that literally. And it's 20 years since that first started.
Oh.
I could not have expressed myself to you at all, even 10 years ago, even 8 years ago. I did the training for my first coaching in 2019. And that's when I started to be able to find my voice without crying and without hearing that emotion in my words.
Right.
When you're listening to somebody and they're just freshly deceased of a sibling or a parent or a very close friend and they falter and they can't get the words out. That's how I was all the time.
Mhm.
And it's so interesting because one of my lovely, lovely friends who I made in that networking group all those years ago. Where are we? That was 2011 when I first met her.
Mm.
She said to me a couple of years ago, "You've changed so much. What I see is somebody who is so much more secure in who she is." And I asked her why she said that. And she said, "It's because my speaking had slowed down.
Mm,
I didn't need to say everything at speed and get it all out anymore
right.
because I was able to be measured and considered in what I was saying."
I love that. So more
And
intense.
shows, it shows a massive turnaround. And the other thing she said was the fact that I'd taken the time to grow my hair.
Mm,
Because I had very, very short hair. Right.
really?
Oh, yes. It
Oh,
was
wow.
no more than about 2.5 inches all over at any point. I
Yeah.
had just can't remember. It was sort of
Yeah.
spiky fringe, and I had a little DA at the
Uh,
back. You know,
well,
took
it's
me
gorgeous. Yeah.
it took me 5 minutes to dry with a
Wow.
little brush and done. But this, you see,
It's
is
gorgeous. Yes.
me feeling who I am and growing into myself in a very powerful way and feeling confident with who I am. You know, so much so that when I said to my hairdresser, and that you'll love this. So just as COVID was starting to hit, I'd seen her for my last haircut of 2019. And I said to her then, "I'm going to grow my hair. That's it, I'm doing it. I'm growing my hair." And she looked at me. She'd been talking quite a while. "Are you sure?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely. Let's book it for 12 weeks." So we booked it for the March. And then, of course, we had the lockdown in the
Yeah.
UK in the February. So when everybody else was moaning about not going to the hairdresser,
Yeah.
little old me was really excited. It a bit longer before I could go. And I didn't actually get to the hairdresser until the when we had the first sort of opening up, which was the July. So
Mm.
that was just after my then birthday. And she was astonished at how long my hair was. But she's been so supportive because she could see a different me. And she said to me, she sees a different me to the first person who came to her all those years ago that was hurting and unsure of herself.
Well, Debbie, you have definitely risen up. I love your relationship phoenix, and a phoenix is rising up, and I can see it rising up in you, and you're helping others rise up and above where they are so that they can rise up to the next level in their life and not get stuck and whatever, if, whether it's grief or trauma, just not get stuck in that. And also, you're helping them with their self talk. You know, what you say to yourself matters because we are creators. There's a book, We Are Made to Create, and we are. So, whatever you're speaking, that is what you're creating in your life. So, speak what you want in your
Yeah,
life. And I
yeah,
love that you pointed out because I felt the same way too. Like, I can't talk fast enough to get it all out. But I love that you said that is a sign of growth when you can be that intentional with your words and not
yeah.
feeling like that you just have to rush it all out. I feel like I've improved in that area myself. So, you know, and I think we're in the same age genre. So, you know, I'm
Mm.
so thankful for you to be here today and all the people that you do help, and not just with grief of losing. I mean, grief is a loss of anything. It's not
It
just a
is
person. It's a
exactly that.
loss of anything.
Yes,
Oh, and you
yes,
have to go through those 5 stages.
money, security,
Yes, yes,
friendships. What happened when you were 14 and your best friend
yeah.
moved to the other side of the country? So in the
Or you
US,
lost
it's
them.
like,
Yeah,
that's
you might
like
have
going
lost.
miles and miles and miles. For us, it's 100 miles, couple of 100 miles at most. But for you, it's like for some people,
Yeah.
going across a timeline.
Yes.
Going into a different time zone or emigrating to the other side of the world almost. And that's your friendship that you envisaged you'd be growing up with your buddy. You
Yeah.
know, and when that doesn't happen, that's actually massive. And everybody, well, now everybody says, well, you've got Facebook and you've got Messenger and you've got this and that and the other. But we only had letter writing when I
Yeah.
was that age. So, you know, these things were important to acknowledge.
Yes. My son was, I think, 14 or 15, and his one of his best friends was in a tragic accident. They were out riding four wheelers, and just so happened my son was on the four wheeler with him, and he got off. And the his friend continued on up the hill, and he tragically died. And that was so hard. I mean,
Mm,
as a mother to the mother, as a mother to my own son, losing his best friend like that. I mean, you did, and then, feeling his pain, because we've honestly never really talked about it, but
yeah.
um, you know, I didn't want him to blame himself because he didn't, try to get him not to do it, or something
Yeah.
like that. But he's a beautiful young man, got three beautiful grandchildren. I mean, he's has a beautiful life, but those are things that we got, that he was a child, and have
Mm,
to deal with something that tragic. So if anyone is listening and you are dealing with that, or dealing with any type of grief, Debbie is your person, and she has a special training she's going to talk about that's coming up this month. So tell us about that.
Indeed. So on the 21st of March, I'm running a 5-hour workshop. It's a very simple workshop. It's just basically looking at three aspects of what's going on with grief and how we can start to change it. And you'll go away with tools and tips and tricks, but you'll start to acknowledge in the workshop things you're experiencing that you may never have acknowledged before. And we'll look at forgiveness and how you do forgiveness well, because, you know, you might think you've got to go and stand and look at somebody in the face and say, I forgive you for. But usually when that happens, somebody else will scoff at you because they won't understand what you're trying to express and they won't have the intelligence to accept it in the way that it is being given. So this is actually about how you learn to express your forgiveness in a very powerful way, which will allow you to take the baggage off.
Mm,
We walk around with this thick, heavy cloak of grief that just has things sticking to it here, there, and everywhere. And
mm,
we just accept all those things. So it's about how you learn to slough off that thick, heavy cloak and all the limpets that are hanging on to it.
mm. I love that.
And
And she said, for the people who sign up through our podcast, you get a special deal for $95.
absolutely,
Yeah,
yes.
thank you,
So,
Debbie. That is so generous. Thank you so
no,
much.
you know, that will run until the 19th of March.
Okay.
And then from the 19th of March, it will go up to the full value. So, you know, in the UK, that is £150. So I think the equivalent is just under $200.
Okay.
So I'm giving a special deal for anybody who signs up through the program. And I will make sure that Pamela has the code that you'll be using when
Okay.
you book that.
That'll be great. And I can add that in the show notes.
Yeah.
Debbie, it's been such a joy to have you on today and to really talk about your background and how you got started. I mean, just 6 years ago. Look how far you've came in 6 years,
I
and how
know,
long your hair has grown in 6 years.
I know. And you know, the thing about why I do the training actually, not in a million years would I have ever told you I'd be sitting here doing what I do today, being a voice for others as well who live with alienation and estrangement. But having had the experience and still living within that experience, I have a unique way of looking at it. And I could also reflect on the fact that as a child, I grew up with alienation and estrangement, and I had no idea. Not at all. So I can understand it from the child's point of view. And actually, for many people, that's really, really important because when you're grieving the loss of a relationship like that, it's very hard to understand the other person when you're so lost in yourself. So if you can find the tools and use the tools, to make the changes for yourself, it changes your perception of what that other person is experiencing, but it also helps you to change your language. And that's hugely important. If we talk in a negative way constantly, we're putting ourselves back in that box that we've always put ourselves in. If we talk in a more positive way, we're lifting the lid.
Yes. I love it. And you, the relationship Phoenix, are helping people rise up and lift that lid. And I'm so thankful that we got to connect. Now, tell everyone where they can reach you, connect with you.
So I'm all over Facebook, Instagram, where else? LinkedIn. Um, I do have TikTok. I'm not very good at it. Uh,
Okay.
and yes, I have my own the website as well, debirichens.co.uk. And
Okay.
that through to a booking link if you want to book a call with me, which is complimentary. But you're very welcome to connect with me, Facebook and Instagram, and ask me any questions there through the private messaging.
That is wonderful. So debirichens.co.uk is their website. And also you can look her up under the Relationship Phoenix. So
That's
get with her, get this training. It's on March 21st. And for our listeners, we're going to have a special code so you can get it for 95 US dollars, right? 95 US
And
dollars.
yes, and I am doing it in the afternoon in the UK so that it
Okay.
is there for all of you lovely people who get up a little later than I do in the day.
That'll be so great. Well, thank you again, Debbie. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. And I hope this spoke to you and spoke to your heart. And whatever you're dealing with, you can reach out to me, reach out to Debbie, and we will help you to rise up above it. So stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you.